Hey, right. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I think it is just afternoon. A very warm welcome to the project showcases, which is where we invite a lot of volunteers who've been working with various charities to come and talk us through the journey, what happened on the way, what was easy, what was hard, and it also helps us, offer charities examples of what we've been working on, and really where they get involved and where things can get tricky, and equally the dynamic of volunteering, because it's not the same as sitting in a full-time team where you're all next to each other. So yeah, thanks guys. The Girl Guiding app is a frontier breaker for us, so a very warm welcome to the team who talked through the project, and this actually was probably one project that saw a really nice smooth transition between people, because we did have the Girl Guides come to us asking for an MVP app, that they were after. It was something we hadn't done anything to this scale before, so there wasn't a team sat there ready to go, there wasn't a tech stack there ready to pick up, there wasn't loads of examples for people to say, how do I start? So Sergey, you did a phenomenal job really kind of getting this going from the sort of product owner role. I'll let everybody describe the roles they've played at various stages, because even now at the tail end of it, it's going to be the first app that we deploy on the STA AWS platform. So there's been huge learning curves. You guys have been phenomenal and just really kept at it, as we've kind of gone on the journey. So a really warm thank you from me, and I'm sure the Girl Guide team have learned shed loads on the journey as well. what always starts as the we need an app for that, and the let's just get started is never quite as straightforward. So yeah, a warm welcome to the team. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, perfect. Shall we do intros first and then we can go into what we're actually talking about? Sure. Okay, so I'll start. Sergey Miller-Pumphrey. I came on as kind of BA / product owner / UX designer / anything else that was required at the very early days where we just tried to scrap this stuff together, and then handed over to a dedicated UX UI designer later on, and did a bit more kind of project management stroke, just working with the team to ensure we had a process together. And I will pass on to Kimberly. I'll go in order of when we all started.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Ford, and I joined Scottish Tech Army as a student looking for experience. I've been working on the front end coding of the Girl Guiding Scotland app. Is there anything else that I should mention, Sergey? Any suggestions?
No, for now, that's perfect.
I think that will do then.
Rose?
Sorry, I'm muting myself. Hi, I'm Rose Clarkson. I joined STA to do some design work. So I'm a business designer by day, bit of a graphic designer and artist by night. So I was hoping to do more of the graphic design type of design that I don't get to do so much in the day job. And I joined this project to help out on that kind of end of things, but it wasn't so much graphic design, it was more looking at the user profiles and the brief. So Sergey and Kimberly and everyone had already done loads of work when I joined, and I'll chat a bit more about what I came along and did. But yeah, I feel slightly cheeky because you guys did so much work. I feel like I did this much, but I'm here anyway, and I'll share what I did and what I led. Thanks. Pete, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm Pete. So I'm a Native developer by trade. So yeah, work doing dev work. I joined 6 months ago-ish to STA and the project, and really initially was having a little bit of look around sort of the code and how things were there, and then the last little bit sort of keeping on top of how we do the deployment and how we get to production, and that's what I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, most of the actual groundwork I think was done by Kimberly and Sam, really doing the sort of front end and back end. So I'm just sort of hovering about, helping out where I can.
Perfect, thanks. I suppose I'll get started then. So each of us are going to take a little bit of time just to talk about, our contributions and what we find was really good, or maybe some challenges, and give a bit of insight. I'm going to start with some of the earlier work in kind of managing stakeholders, requirements gathering, and the initial couple of sets of wireframes. And then I'll hand over to Rose, who will consolidate all of that into a really great design brief and take you through that. Kimberly's going to take us through her experience, of course, on coding in the project, but also show a couple of clips to show what the GGS app looks like right now. So you can see the evolution from the initial set of wireframes into something that's actually functioning. As Pete said on a private chat earlier, clips over live demos is always preferred. So we're showing clips instead of potentially something going wrong. And then Pete's going to take us through, as I said, and a bit more technical stuff. How do we actually deploy this stuff? How do we ensure quality? All of this kind of good stuff. So this is not going to be kind of slide heavy. It's going to be much more conversational, but I will present Chrome and take you through a bit of our Confluence and our wireframes, if that helps again. So from my perspective, came on kind of, as I mentioned, a bit, BA, a bit product manager, product owner, project manager, UX, UI, all of that kind of good stuff. But what was interesting with the GGS app compared to a previous project I've done with STA was they were actually very clear in their requirements. They kind of knew what they wanted. They were really headstrong in why they wanted it and all that kind of stuff, which was a really interesting thing, because it wasn't so much eliciting initial vague requirements, but it was more clarifying that it was the right thing to do. And I think Rose will probably speak a little bit to this as well in the design brief. And it was mostly our job just to make sure that we weren't missing something. So although they were clear what they wanted, we also wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing for the right reasons to solve the right problems. So initially, some of the things that we did was to just look at Girl Guidance Scotland, get to know them really well, understand their kind of core people, so the members, the team leads, the actual organisers and volunteers, learn a bit more about their geography and stuff like that, and then really get to their purpose and kind of values and their mission. And I'm going to share a little bit here, if you don't mind. And we'll see how all this ties together. Hopefully everyone can see here. So this is our kind of Confluence area. I started to pull together this brief. This didn't look kind of as organized and neat in the early days, where of course there were notes absolutely everywhere, and trying to tie it together was the outcome as you see here. So we tried to really understand what they're looking for and figure out the kind of keywords, and a lot of this gets put into a really nice way in Rose's design brief as well. They were looking for awareness. They were looking as a marketing opportunity, trying to increase their visibility and encourage more members to join. And their mission and values were around wanting all girls across Scotland to have a space and opportunities need to grow confidence. And part of that is having that collaboration. That's why there's such a well-established and valuable members community. But they also wanted something that potentially could be reusable in the future. And this made a bit of a challenge for us to figure out what's our MVP versus what's additional requirements or growth for this app in the future, and ensure that we manage those expectations and kind of scope in the short term, but understand where it could go in the future. So this brought us to a bit of a hypothesis. So we could have a digitally enabled event, such as the kind of treasure hunt. We'll meet many of the goals of competitiveness, togetherness, and inclusion. So although there's still a distributed network, we wanted them to feel like they were achieving something all together, but still have an element of competition, which is something that was really kind of brought home by the volunteers and organisers. They say, although they're there to work together, they still want that element of competition to see them really try and grow and achieve. Still make it a bit of a market opportunity and hopefully bring everyone together, even though we're starting to get out of the pandemic times. With that though, some of the early issues or kind of challenges we had to overcome was understanding what we wanted to do. So although they were clear that that they were, sorry, somebody was trying to get into this room, although they were clear that they were looking for something that could maybe be like scanning QR codes or whatever, we had to figure out what options we would put together. So we could have a mobile app, we could have QR codes, we could have dedicated native apps, or we could go for web apps. And this is some of the early discussions that we needed around scope to ensure that we had something that was deliverable within a reasonable time frame. And in the end, we ended up going for a web app. Now, that brought us onto some of the early prototypes. So I'm going to try and speed up a little bit to make sure everyone's got plenty of time. But I wanted to give a bit of the overview of the process that we used here, because it could perhaps be useful for any of the other projects that we've got. So we knew what we wanted to do, but we had to understand also how we were going to do it, what those requirements were, and where we might actually trim some of the requirements to make sure that we've got a useful kind of MVP. So we actually used a kind of framework called story mapping, where we brought together the user journey in kind of features. So we knew that we needed to register people in one way or another, or they needed to have access to the app in some way. With that, there might be challenges around permissions or GDPR. We might be able to have a members unit or a members area at some point in the future, could have notifications. Then we've got the core kind of pieces, which are around the treasure hunt and the kind of competition element. And then potentially, to make it reusable, they could self-create new events and all that kind of stuff. But you can see how this could easily be a product of its own in a 5-year plan. So we had to, we used this as a conversational tool with the stakeholders to figure out what do we want to achieve in the short term versus how we can build that out in the future as part of their digital marketing strategy. So with that in mind, we went into some wireframes. So I'm actually going to show you. So we're using Figma. Figma is free, so if anyone's interested in UX or UI design, you can all sign up to Figma for free and just start plotting about. And in our initial V1 set of wires, it was super rough because we're just trying to figure out what the rough journey might be and get the stakeholders on board. So you can see this does not look necessarily pretty. It was just there to get a journey together. And as a wee kind of note for kind of lessons learned and stuff like that, the uglier it looks in the first set of the wires is probably the better, because you really want your stakeholders to be focusing on the journey and the features and the functionality, rather than thinking that should be a darker shade of blue and that should be a lighter shade of gray and stuff like that. So we're going to come in, we're going to enter some kind of member. We know we need a way to identify people, even if it's just a really easy, soft mechanism to stop anyone just being able to access this and kind of muck about with it. So have some form of code and be able to identify that off a register somewhere. And then we come into the main app. So we agreed early on that the main thing we were doing here was presenting a kind of a map of points of interest. So that was going to be the largest thing on the page, and try not to hide that too much. With that, we're able to access some of the points, read about them, hopefully get a bit of rich media, learn about them, and then in some way or another indicate that you've done that activity, whatever that activity might be. And then you can identify that on the page as well. And there'll be some form of navigation to show filtering or geolocation, that kind of stuff, but that will come a bit later on. This helped us to figure out what our feature set was going to be with the stakeholders in the first instance. And then we moved on to a second set that was a bit more high res. So we've got a map that's kind of movable and panable, got our code that we can submit. We'll have some error messages on there. And the things we'd agreed to add included a progress ability, which I'll show you in just 1 second. This is the competition element. So in the first set of wires, we didn't have this, and then in the second set, we added this in if we agreed that it was all possible to do. And with that, I think I'm going to stop and not give away too much of the app design, because Kimberly's going to take us through it anyway, and it's probably a good place to stop for Rose coming in with the design brief. So Rose.
Thank you. Joanna's very kindly going to share because I have a habit of breaking my entire machine, and I've discovered that it turns my camera off at the moment when I share. So I'm not going to walk through the whole brief, but I'm more than happy to share this with anyone who's interested afterwards, because we pulled it together, but I think as Sergey said, I came in quite late in the day, so the team had already actually walked through a lot of the scope and figured out a lot of things, and all that rich detail was in the Confluence page. So really this was just me pulling some of the key things together and playing that back as a bit of a recap. And the bits we focused on with the clients were mainly around the user personas, so just digging into a bit more detail around understanding who the users were that we were designing for. And then also just double checking that we were clear and that they were clear on the outcomes that we were expecting. So we have that hypothesis that if we build this app and we run this event, it will increase the engagement. But, you know, how sure are we that that's the right solution to the problem? Have we found the right problem? Is there anything else that we can do to kind of give ourselves more confidence ahead of actually going ahead and building and launching? I think in the end, what happened in this case was actually the potential options that Sergey's mentioned were narrowed down to quite a straightforward, simple MVP. So what we landed up agreeing was that effectively this first event would be the test. So normally I think we'd like to do a brief like this and develop personas right at the start, and then these would really inform a lot of the design, but we'd also use them to do testing up front and potentially kind of low-fi prototype testing before we even build anything. Because of the way that the app's been progressing, but also access to the members themselves, and obviously all of the challenges of virtual working and COVID and everything else that we've all been going through, doing upfront testing was going to be quite tricky. So what we've actually agreed we'll do is go live, and we'll use the live version of the app effectively to test with real members. But I think doing these personas was still quite useful certainly for me, hopefully for the rest of the team as well, just to think through, you know, who we're designing for. So we've got 3 personas here, which were the kind of unit leaders, and one for one of the parents that might be using the app and trying to guide a group through it, or, you know, use it with their kids. And then there's another couple of personas on the next side for the Girl Guiding members themselves, the different age groups. And I think if you haven't worked with personas before, I think when you write down information about your user group, you tend to focus on the demographics, things like age groups and potentially salary, that sort of information, and trying to convert those into a persona for me really helps put yourself in the user's shoes really, and kind of make you explore more of the behavioral side of how they might use the app and the challenges they might face. So Hassan there as an example, we're thinking, well, you know, someone might actually be trying to use the app as an opportunity to explore an area that they've just moved to with their kids, you know, and therefore you want the app to be easy to use on the move. Thanks, Joanna. Well done for keeping up with my jumping around. So we want that to be something that's simple to use if you're potentially trying to drive around and you're not familiar with the area. Likewise, obviously, you might have some unit leaders who aren't as tech savvy as some of the others, and this is all new to them, etc. And at the other end of the sort of scale, you might have some of the kids might have been playing around with iPhones and whatnot before they could walk, and therefore actually that might be too simple. So we use these to kind of discuss those sorts of things and just to validate whether we were doing the right thing in terms of the design and the scope decisions that we're making. So it can be a very useful tool. And I think one of the other volunteers with STA picked this up while I was pulling it together for this project and used it for one of the other projects, and said they found it also a really useful way to kind of just recap, bring it together and play it back in writing to the client and make sure that there's nothing that's kind of got lost in as an assumption or clarified. And as I said, to expand on those user personas a little bit. So hopefully a useful tool for people as part of that design process. I think that's it from me. I'm conscious of time, so I'll let Camilla and Pete get on to the next bit.
Cool. I think I'm next on the agenda, if I'm right. And then we'll let Kimberly end with the like nice snazzy clips showing everyone how it looks, because that's like the cool bit. So I guess from my point of view, I think there's a couple of things that are interesting generally about sort of where we are in the project and considerations we've had along the way. So one of the things sort of we've been talking about, at least more recently, is how do we get this available to people for when we go live, and how does stuff like data look for us? So one of the big things we've got is a whole load of data basically from Girl Guiding Scotland. So we need to have for every location, well, we need to have a list of locations for every location. We need to have information about longitude and latitude. We also need an image. We also need a description. So there's a whole raft of information there that we're looking for so that we can populate the app properly. When it came to sort of how are we going to make this available, what are we going to do, one of the things that when I came sort of on the project and we were talking about was having a sort of, should there be essentially an admin app that sort of allowed us to do this sort of upload and management and things like that. One of the things we did at that point was sort of rule that out as a necessity. Looking at the sort of data that we had and what we needed to do, it would actually be pretty easy just to do a data dump and basically into our database and run off of that. So that's one of the things we thought about and sort of ruled out a little bit that we considered. One of the other things around sort of deployment that was interesting, I think, in this case is the sort of instruction we got, I guess, from GGS was that they had an agency that they used for everything. So I think that's probably going to be quite a common case where, you know, a charity themselves don't, or whoever it is we're dealing with, don't necessarily have like the tech or the awareness to do things themselves. So in the case of GGS, what they've done is outsourced all of that, luckily to a place in Edinburgh that sort of handles it all for them. So when I was speaking with them, what came out of that, again, it was interesting for this point, is whilst GGS were quite strong on us using them to be the place that we deploy everything, that they'd handle everything. When it came down to it, that agency very much deals with sort of blogs and WordPress websites, and that was really the sort of stuff they provided for GGS and nothing aside from that. What was actually very helpful is the person I spoke to at that agency gave me a lot of extra information that made my like poiroting of trying to find out information a little bit easier. So when it comes to like how we want to go live, how we want it to appear to people, we very sort of, from speaking with GGS, came up with the idea of having it as a sort of subdomain. So you would go to like find.girlguidingscotland.com, something like that. So in order to do that, what you need to do is essentially have that subdomain, be able to do stuff around like DNS so that you can point to that. And luckily the person in the agency said all of that stuff isn't handled by them. It's actually handled by Pulsant. And gave me the contact details for that and everything that was necessary, which was, in my case, very, very helpful. So that kind of led us down a different path where we're going, well, how can we now deploy this? Because we kind of hoped they would have something, we would be able to just go, here's an application, bash on, do what you need to do. So that's where really we're quite lucky as STA, because there is sort of infrastructure here, there's availability here for doing things. So now what we're in the process of doing, like at this exact moment, is deploying all of these applications that we've got. So we've got a front end and a back end. So the front end is React and then the back end is in C#, is deploying that to AWS so that we can then serve that data and it be available, and we can do some sort of on the ground user testing, everything like that. So that's really what's going on just now. We're very lucky, like I say, the STA has that and has that capability. I think when it came down to it, we were a little restricted as far as what we could deploy on and use, and that mostly comes down to how the app's been built. These decisions were obviously made a long time ago, and I think people tend to go with what they know. So that's why we're sort of C# React, which makes sense. Obviously, for ease, we've also then gone with sort of Windows-based EC2 instance, again, for ease, because it's, you know, Microsoft C#, Microsoft server, just makes life a little bit easier. I think in other cases, you know, we'd maybe not even need to have EC2 because that's quite low level. There's stuff we could use around like EKS and Fargate and things like that that would actually make life a lot easier, where if we're sort of agnostic enough that we can not really worry about things. So yeah, that's sort of where we are at the moment as far as deployment and production readiness goes. So yeah, I'll let Kimberly take over and show you the app, which is the coolest bit of everything. So take it away.
Hello, so I've prepared a few words as well, just to talk about my stages of involvement in the project and the technical work done. So I came into the project as requirements were still being established. I contributed to research into third-party services to use, such as the map service that we needed, and I contributed to the implementation of the web app. I had some previous experience using the mapping service that we went with and its supporting framework, and I found an additional React library to allow easy out-of-the-box use. Because the web app uses the React library for its development, finding this framework to use with the mapping service, it saved us having to write any custom code to present and access the mapping data. So looking at the technical work, I completed implementation of displaying the map with zoom controls and geolocation. I implemented checks against where the user's device is and the coordinates of the location being collected. This is to within 11 meters precision based on the number of digits that we use in the coordinates. 1 digit less and the precision is just a stingy 1 meter, so 11 meters seem to be about the right level. And I also worked on the presentation of login, location and leaderboard modals. As I previously had a background using JavaScript without any additional libraries and frameworks, I began learning the component-based library React to work on this project. React makes it easier to reuse component parts of an application, so that saves development time later. Additionally, I learned to use the styles library Bootstrap to more efficiently style the application, plus the CSS preprocessor Sass, which further gives efficiency gains for reusability, as with Sass you can manipulate specific parts of the Bootstrap, so certain features might use a variable name rather than having to individually say we want this thing to be this color. You just say we're using this variable, and you can set that to the particular branding. So another important gain for me working on this project was having the experience working on a team. So in my case, when I joined the project last summer, I was a distance learning student. I was out of work and struggling to secure industry work or internships, mainly due to Kickstart scheme restrictions, barring me being able to apply, let alone get any further. So volunteering with the Scottish Tech Army, this gave me a way to work on a team project and see how professionals work together. The nature of volunteering meant I could fit the volunteering around my course deadlines and develop new skills, both technical and social, to add to my growing set. Specifically, I had my first opportunity to implement features from a professional's visual designs. I was able to share my own knowledge and influence some technical decisions, and I had team members that I could ask general and technical advice of. as I have been interviewing recently for graduate roles, I have found that my experience with the STA has prepared me for working in similarly structured teams of designers, developers, and project managers. This is an organisation I would definitely recommend working with, particularly because of that exposure to professionals with different specialisations. So I will now move on to demonstrating the app, and hopefully I will be able to share my screen.
You might feel like a new music now. I don't know what girl guiding music would be. It feels like I should be skipping along, but.
Okay, so it's hopefully going to let me play this PowerPoint that I've put together with some stills and little video clips.
Ooh, we can see your screen.
Except some of my menu options are being covered up by Zoom. Right, let's see if I can move that down a second so I can just grab the slideshow bit. There we go. So I've got the controls I want. Okay, so I will just set it from the beginning and I will talk you through this. So this is a demo of the Girl Guiding Scotland Treasure Hunt app, and we are going to look at the presentation of the map, the login, the location, and the leaderboard features. The first thing that the user sees when they log in will be the map and a login modal with the background map grayed out. They will have a code supplied to them by Girl Guiding Scotland that they can enter in the login modal, and then they can enter the application. And when they are successful, they will briefly see a nice little graphic of the Girl Guiding Scotland logo, just confirming that that is loading in. However, we do have some use cases for if things don't go ideally. So if the user bypasses the login and they are presented with a message just advising them that they need to log in order to access the locations. In this same sequence, this is used if, say, the data server is disconnected. So it just informs the user as to what the problem is. So this little video that you'll see in a moment, this demonstrates a longer loading graphic sequence, which changes the color of the GGS logo just to make it a little more interesting. And it uses the branding colors that they use on their website. So it is a little bit blink and you miss it. So I'm quite happy to play that a couple of times just so that you can see the color change there. So they're just bypassing it now, but the same thing on the colors applies if there's a disconnect as well. So it just goes from the blue through to teal and their sort of deep pink color. So just see that once more. Okay, I have a horrible feeling it's going to play it again because of the way PowerPoint works. I'll just see if it'll
Great to see though. It's such a good idea.
Yeah, hopefully it will let me through to the next slide now. Okay, so here is a still view of the map with the locations. Actually, I'm not sure no, it's not. I can't tell just from when it loads. So we've got the view after they've logged in. So we can see a couple of already collected locations there, and we will see a new location being collected. So this just shows that that location as well is out of range anyway. This one's in range and it's got a brighter button. It also confirms that they have collected the location. PowerPoint is just playing it again before it lets me leave the slide. So I think I'll avoid playing them manually next time. No, I think it stopped. Okay, so we've got a nice big still here, just showing an example of one of the locations that the user can currently pull up from clicking or tapping one of the pins. So this one, it's previously been visited, and it's also out of range for collection. So we have nice bright red, pink buttons for collecting when they're in range, but there's a muted color just to show when they're out of range. And if they try to collect something they already have collected, the server will come back and just confirm that it's already been collected. And then lastly, we've got a still of the leaderboard. So if the user just clicks or taps the leaderboard button at the bottom of the screen, they will see a ranked list of the Girl Guide units, with the one that's collected the most landmarks up at the top. And then hopefully once we've got the data through from Girl Guide in Scotland, we should have a nice picture to put at the top there to make it more interesting. And that's that.
Definitely need a louder applause. I need more hands. That looks brilliant. I love some of the graphics on it. It's really good.
I'll reiterate that this is one of the first times I've actually seen it since it's gone into development and UI from the earliest days. So well done, Kimberly. That's fantastic. Well done, team.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I guess, you know, I open up the floor to any questions from anybody, but I guess I have to say, guys, well done. Kimberly, it was really nice to hear almost what you've been able to explore and learn as well, you know, because I think there is that kind of element when you finish a course kind of going, right, how do I describe what I've learned? How do I use it? So, you know, really nice and, you know, delighted. I mean, you lucked out, you've got a great team, you know, so it really has come together nicely. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Jean, you've got your hand up.
Same all that Joanna just said from me too, Kimberly. It sounds wonderful, and I really hope it gets you most amazing job now. I have a quick question for you on the app, on how the app works, and then a stakeholder question for Sergey. So on the app, how does a guide or ranger actually collect? What do they have to do, or do they just go, I've been there, and the app believes them?
Okay, so they can travel to an area with the locations or the landmarks with their phone, and once they're logged in, they can see markers showing where the locations are, and so long as they are within about 11 meters of one of the locations marked on there, the app can check what the coordinates of the device is. Just so long as they enable geolocation. I mean, that's not something that I demonstrated there, but once they open up the web page, they will get a message asking them, you know, to enable geolocation or not. And so long as they've got that enabled, then it can check where they are. Now, because I'm not up in Edinburgh, I had to cheat really, and whilst I was developing, I had to let it think that I was at a set location. So when the team come to test this, it will be directly checking where they are against the landmarks that are in that area.
I think we need some STA teams getting on that.
Yeah.
And as for collecting the locations, yes, so long as they are within range, then when they hit the collect location button, that the relevant checks will be made, and then a message is sent to the back-end server communicating that it's been picked up. And then hopefully we should then start to get data coming through about the units and how many that they've collected.
Cool.
Can I add to that? Just, I think one of the really interesting things was around the kind of so what element. So, you know, they've gone out, they've gone and stood at Greyfriars Bobby, so what? But this is where, and it maybe ties in a little bit, I don't know what your question or your stakeholders might be, but ties in a little bit to the kind of requirements gathering. So there's only so much we can do. And then the content has to come from the stakeholders. So one of the things they can do with what's already there is add in maybe riddles and which one to go to next. So it's not just go and collect them all within a 1 mile radius, but it's actually maybe a particular route they need to go around. They could also have an activity that they have to do when they get there, and so it's a bit more fun, a bit more engaging, and a bit more about learning as well. So the functionality of the app is helps to just get them there and do a thing, but the content would also drive the kind of more value out of it as well.
Okay, and that could be future enhancements or development.
Yeah, well, I mean, it can be right now, because it can just be an activity or a question or a something as part of the content that Kimberly showed.
Where would they put the app? But they'd have to put an answer in the app, though. The app would have to be capable of collecting that.
Well, if it's a riddle or something, the answer is the location. So they would know they've gone to the right place just by having that. But yeah, there could also be controls in the app itself. But I'm not sure where the discussion for that went. I don't know if Rose is able to answer that.
Yeah, like you say, we chatted through a lot of that, and I think in the end it stayed quite simple. So we talked lots throughout this and potential use cases of the app about all the things that we could do, and the key was we were trying to keep the build and the work for the clients as simple as possible for the first time around. So we said, those things like an extra activity or extra content, for us, that would just be part of that basic design, and then it would be up to them to add what they want. So there's no sort of interactive, you were actually doing a quiz in the app or anything like that. And I don't think they've even finished gathering all of that content yet, so we haven't actually seen the final set and what they add. And the guys are still shaking their heads, so I haven't missed anything in the last 2 weeks.
My stakeholder question was, stakeholders are always a challenge and very interesting. And I wondered if they were a consistent set of people over time, and if they were in agreement with each other terribly much.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. There was an added kind of complexity in this particular project because there was a false start before. So, we'd already kind of started work with them with a different team, and then that hadn't progressed. So that they'd started again, but lost a bit of time. So they weren't bad or anything, but they had already had maybe a bit of a negative experience. So it was really on us to make sure that they had such a positive experience this time around, and that we were clear. And that's where the kind of setting expectations and timelines was really important, to do that as transparently as possible up front. This is not going to be a 2-month project. We don't have 3 teams and 15 developers working full time. It's just not going to happen. And that was one of the first things that we had to kind of get away from, was they wanted it to be like an August last year thing, and we had to be clear that it was probably not going to manage that, But they were really good with that, as most stakeholders are. If you're honest with them, they'll be along the journey with you. That's the key thing. And they understood why. In terms of their consistency, I think they were, for the most part. One person left who was the kind of lead, but that didn't leave this project. They left the organization. I believe that's right, Joanna. But for the most part, they were relatively consistent. The new person that came in kind of carried on, and they had kind of a single voice, which was from the salaried people, but they had other people that gave opinions. So there was somebody to give direction, while everyone could come in with their opinion as well, which was good.
Good. Sorry.
Thanks, Jean. Oh no, you've still got the cough. I hope you're better. Colin, you've had your hand up for a while.
I think you're on mute, Colin.
We can't hear you, Colin. We definitely heard you earlier.
No, I don't think it's a mute. It must be
Oh
on
no,
the
you're either going to have to mime it or type it. Well, if you type it, Colin, in the meantime, there was a question that had come in from Chris, who unfortunately had to step away, but he basically asked about, hold on, sorry, I'm now trying to get my screen going. He was asking about, did you introduce any automation testing in the development process? And if you did, what tools did you use?
If that's for me, because much of what I was doing was visual and I was just pulling from the server, no, there was no automation testing.
No worries. And then if there were there any issues or tips you could show to other groups doing mobile app development for the STA, if you know what I mean? So, you know, I think I quite liked your point, Sergey, around the don't build something beautiful first, when you're really actually trying to get somebody to think about what are you trying to do, because you know, colors and photos and images do become the focus, unfortunately, and you're like, what was the feedback? They didn't like the blue. What about everything else? You know, and the stories format, a few people I think commented on that approach, liking that breakdown. Rose, I'll share with everybody Rose's brief as well, because I think, you know, ideally everybody would arrive at the beginning of the project, but the nature of volunteering and people turning over and everybody bringing their own way of working means you don't always get that. But, you know, I think in a bit like a retrospective of, well, where are we, and sitting in front of the mirror and saying, have we thought everything through? Your stepping in and doing that, Rose, was invaluable as well anyway, because there is that kind of like, right, if it is handed to Isla from the Rainbows or whatever it was, you know, is it simple enough for that age group to pick up? But have we got you yet, Colin?
I think I might be back.
Yay, excellent.
I've got this on my mic and I must have sat on it or something. That also mutes it. Yeah, I've got a mute button on this as well. Yeah, so
issues, yay.
I just wanted to say well done. What an achievement. It really looks great. I'm working on an app as well for the NHS right now. So this is particularly interesting to me, and seeing what you've achieved. You know, I think I'll speak to you a bit later about maybe having a look at some of the documentation that you've shown, just so I can share it with my team as well, because I think we'd maybe like to recreate some of that. I was also thinking, you know, looking at the app itself, it could be used for other things, you know, work treasure hunts, and you know, maybe on bus tours, you could be, you know, assisting things like that. So it's, you know, it's got lots of, you know, other things you can take from it. So yeah, really
it's
good.
funny you mentioned that. It's one of the briefs that Joanna had kind of in the background for this is the reusability aspect of it. So we'd had a request from, remind me, was it Anstruther?
Yes, yeah.
For improving tourism with some kind of activity. So you can imagine that this is a bare bones that could easily have different colors, different logos, and different data dumps for other points of interest, but it could be the same thing. It's a treasure hunt in a different place. So it could absolutely just be kind of plopped up and put somewhere else for a different use.
Yeah. Did you look at Pokemon Go as well?
I'm a huge Pogo fan, so yes, definitely a bit of an inspiration.
Yeah, good. I was wondering how you kept it together as a team. You know, that's one thing I'm struggling with right now, is actually trying to get the work done when everybody has got so much on at the same time. You know, how did you keep up to date with the project and you know, push on with it? Did you have? I see you use Confluence, and you know, and did you keep that up to date? How is it you kept everyone engaged?
Yeah. So I think I can start this, but then it'll probably be for the team to continue it, because I actually left for a while, unfortunately, because I had too many personal commitments. But in this, at the beginning, we did take advantage of Jira for task management. I think Kimberly was actually the best one for actually using it. The rest of us were pretty terrible. So well done, Kimberly. But so yeah, Confluence and Jira, we used Trello a little bit right at the start. But actually the biggest thing was we set a time once a week where we would meet. That doesn't mean we all met every week. That doesn't mean we met every week. It just was a time that there was set aside that we would attempt to hit. So I think it started like a Monday night at 7 or something, and it's moved around a couple of times depending on people's availability. But having something agreed up front and set, even if you don't do it every week, was the thing that when I was still working with the team, really useful, because it was something to aim for and getting updates. But I'll pass over to the team for any other.
I think one of the things that was quite useful, Sam did like all the back end work, was there's a few points where if he had questions about things around like, you know, how could we do an API for something? How might we, like, you know, do the data loading? Anything like that was really, because we had that time slot, was either piggybacking off the back of that to go, should we just stay and chat for 15, 20, 30 minutes after, or shall we, you know, screen share on Friday at 6, something like that, to sort of go like, right, we'll be proactive, we'll set aside time, we'll talk stuff through. Like, obviously sometimes you don't have time to do things, and I think that's kind of where the question again about testing came in to some of this stuff, is when you've not got as much time from people, is it's really important to get the important stuff from them. So whilst like I would advocate for we should test everything as much as possible, especially with automation and things like that, when it comes to like an app like this, where we're wanting to get stuff out there, when we're wanting to be doing things, when you've got a couple of people involved, stuff like that does fundamentally end up a little bit by the wayside. So that's I think from what I saw, how that engagement happened was just that consistent talking, the consistent, like, you know, if Sam said something or Kimberly had an issue with something, then either of them would help each other out, or would take on certain parts, or like say we spoke about how we do APIs, and then Sam went away and wrote some of that stuff, and then the next week we're like, bam, here's the JSON for what you're going to get. Like, does that work? Yeah, it does. Cool. Like that was very much the way of doing it, and yeah, it worked for what I saw really well.
Yeah, I think the Slack was really good, as well as the weekly slot, because for some of us, like, who were kind of floating around the edges, trying to figure out when we could be useful and when we weren't needed, I was always kind of 2 steps behind, but then I could check the Slack and see, right, okay, there's no specific questions for me. I've not, you know, let anybody down by not making the meeting or whatever, or if there is a question, I can pick it up async afterwards. So having those 2 like clear ways of being able to get people when you need, and like you say, cover the most important things, I think made it work.
I think
Although
definitely one of the things a few projects have had is be really clear what you're using for what, because there's also a degree of sometimes too many tools turn up, and then you end up going, well, is that on the Trello, or is that in Jira, or is that on the Slack, or do you know what I mean? So there's some stuff there we can help you get set up, Colin. But I think the thinking out loud has helped many groups, just mean, because then it makes it okay to say, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know what to do with this error. And sometimes the groups, I know definitely with the volunteer app, Magda's seen a lot of success with the, right, if anybody wants to hold on to have a look at, you're then sharing what you found a little bit as well, because it can feel a bit lonely coding alone in a room, if you know what I mean. So it just makes people feel a bit more of a team. But you, I mean, you guys have been fab. I think there's a nice cadence of, you had a set time each week. Not everybody's made every week. There's been no drama with that. You've just kind of plugged away at getting the bits and pieces done.
I think when
you've done what you've said you were going to do, which doesn't always happen, unfortunately, either.
I was going to add one lesson learned that I'm not sure if we said, but I think we thought we would be the hold up, and actually a lot of the stuff at the end is around the GGS trying to gather all that content together. So that was probably the other thing, was being really clear up front, which I know I did straight away with the next project, was what are we doing, what are you doing, and which things do we think will take the longest, e.g. the content and the copy and everything, because otherwise that means actually we landed up all ready to go near the end and then you're stuck waiting again, and that's when all our personal commitments come up and we have to change teams, etc. again. So yeah, that's another thing, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Cool, right, I'm conscious of time. I think it's phenomenal what you guys have done. There is so much potential for reuse. It looks nice. It works simply. There's a huge degree of keep it simple. Do you know what I mean? You know they're not going to panic going, oh God, we need training. We need to work out how to use it. It clearly helps you know what you need to do. So I will never look at Greyfires Bobby the same again. I'll be there going, I need to bag it. But yeah, brilliant. And Kimberly, I'm sure you'll be snapped up if you haven't been already. Yeah, no, and a big thanks to Sam as well, who I know can't be here, and obviously Paul Cofield has helped. So there's been lots of people who've done bits on the way as well. So well done, guys.
Thanks very much.
Cool. Right.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.